We are back with Richard Haas and Randa Slim. Randa, I want to ask you about the Syria sanctions relief that President Trump announced. He did it in a very Trumpian fashion. He just announced it and said it was a favor basically to the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. I do think it was a good idea to give this guy a chance. And it shows you the advantage of Trump's disruption. This would have taken years of committee meetings if it had been done the normal way. But A, do you think it's a good idea? And B, can it actually happen? As with many of the things Donald Trump does, can the president simply deliver sanctions relief that way when these were, I think, congressionally enacted sanctions?
I think it's a good idea. I mean, there is a fait accompli now in Syria, which is Mr. Shara is the interim president of Syria, and he is in the process of consolidating control over all Syrian territory. And so the Biden administration started engaging with him and his group right after the fall of Bashar al-Assad last December. And the Trump administration has been continuing along the same path, except that they have, put some conditions on sanctions relief. The decision by Mr. Trump disrupted that timetable. I think we were heading towards some kind of sanction relief, but that was disrupted. It has been accelerated in a way. Now, how much of those that sanction relief can happen in the short term? As you well pointed out, some of them have been imposed by Congress, like the Caesar Act, like in 2019, and before that, the Syria Accountability Act in 2003, and those will require congressional approval to be lifted. And then some can be lifted by executive action, executive orders. But also, in addition to our own legal process and what's going to happen inside this legal process, also international financial institutions will have a say in how effective and how fast and how effective these sanction relief can be implemented. And so it's going to take some time. Mr. Shara needs quick economic relief. The economy is in tatters. 60% of the GDP has shrunk since 2011. He has half of the country's infrastructure has been totally destroyed, and some of this work needs, economic reforms and actions internally. But he cannot rebuild without assistance from outside, especially regionals, and without assistance from international financial institutions.
Richard, what do you make of, what is the insight into Donald Trump when he was asked about this guy? His first reaction is, attractive guy, tough. I bet Justin Trudeau is wondering why he's not regarded by Donald Trump as attractive. Here, this bearded former jihadi is regarded as attractive. What is going on?
It's so interesting. Normally, Fred, I've worked for a number of presidents, and normally policy kind of works its way up through an administration. This is clearly the most top-down administration we've seen. So he's done this. I think he's intrigued. Trump likes to bring people around, whether it's former political enemies at home or foreign leaders. Again, he doesn't much care about what goes on inside countries. I thought this was interesting. In some ways, it's something for the Saudis. Look, the last thing the region needs is another failed state. So I see, on one hand, the strategic rationale for this. It does send a signal to the Israelis. I was just surprised by the lack of conditionality. For example, how they deal with the Kurds. Second of all, that there's no support for terrorism. That said, we're mainly talking about waiving sanctions. You can put them back in if these guys disappoint. So I think there's a degree of conditionality here. And it's just basically Trump's way of he's just not conventional. He's not a traditional person. And as you said at the outset, that can get him in the United States in trouble at times. On the other hand, it's a great way to short circuit the bureaucracy and try something new and different. We'll see.
15 seconds. I just want one quick, the Qatari jet. He describes it as like a gimme in a putt. You're a great golfer. Does that strike you as the right analogy?
No, it'd be closer to standing on the tee and say, will you agree that this counts as a hole-in-one for me before you hit it? A gimme's 2 feet. It's something very small and little. A 747 worth $400 billion is not in my definition of a gimme.
Richard Haas, Randa Slim. Pleasure to have you both on. President Trump's instinct for disruption and tendency to shoot from the hip has caused chaos, opposition, and abrupt reversals. But this week, Trump reminded us that sometimes his willingness to take risks and think outside the box can shake up tired old ways. In Saudi Arabia, he surprised everyone by meeting with Syria's new leader, a former jihadi, and announcing that he would remove all U.S. sanctions on the country. He has also suggested repeatedly that his administration is willing to make a new nuclear deal with Iran. If so, he could bring a new level of peace and stability to the Middle East. Trump's newfound interest in an Iran deal is ironic, verging on bizarre. After all, he was the one who pulled the U.S. out of the original Iran nuclear deal, even though most serious observers, including U.S. intelligence agencies, believed that Iran had been adhering to the terms of the deal. This is one more example of Donald Trump creating a problem, reversing himself, and then proudly announcing to the world that he has brilliantly reset the situation. But whatever the past, events have transpired that could make for a better deal today than before. The two fundamental shifts that are most relevant here are Iran's weakness and Saudi Arabia's strength. Iran is in worse shape than it has been in a generation. Decades of chronic mismanagement of the economy, exacerbated by sanctions, massive corruption, and a brutal dictatorship have caused deep public dissatisfaction with the Islamic regime. Add to that last year's stunningly successful Israeli assaults on Hezbollah and Iran's own air defenses, plus Tehran's closest Arab ally, Syria's Bashar al-Assad's government collapsed, and the primary opposition forces, whom Iranian-backed militias had been fighting for years, became the new government. Put this all together, and Iran is at its weakest point since Saddam Hussein invaded the fledgling Islamic Republic in 1980. Second, Saudi Arabia has been growing in strength, and its foreign policy has been transformed over the last few years. It has negotiated a truce with the Houthis, improved relations with Qatar, and developed better ties with countries like Lebanon and Iraq. Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman has realized that to achieve his primary dream, the modernization of Saudi Arabia, he needs stability in the region. The most remarkable sign of this has been the growing rapprochement between Saudi Arabia and Iran, with officials of the two countries meeting with some regularity. Saudi officials now explicitly support a new Iran nuclear deal. The obstacle to the deal is what it has always been, Bibi Netanyahu. But increasingly, his obstinacy does not find support from Saudi Arabia or other Gulf states. Why? Perhaps they're less wary of Iran because of its weakened state. Perhaps because Netanyahu's ferocious war in Gaza has made it harder for them to back anything he advocates. And perhaps because they realize that such a deal is in fact the best way to contain the dangers of nuclear proliferation in the region. Additionally, one of the compromises being mooted, a regional consortium that would enrich uranium, could be a helpful model that would pave the way for Saudi Arabia's own plan to have a civilian nuclear program. The challenge for Trump is that his administration is divided on this issue between two camps, realists and neoconservatives. The former seem to include Trump himself and Steve Witkoff, the chief negotiator. On the other side are various Iran hawks, most prominently Marco Rubio, along with a bevy of congressional Republicans. The two sides still seem to be battling, which explains why the administration seems to change its tone and emphasis every few days. The main Iran hawk, of course, is Bibi Netanyahu, who warns that Iran will get a bomb soon unless it is bombed. But it's worth keeping in mind that Netanyahu has been predicting that Iran is months away from getting a nuclear bomb for at least 13 years. Actually, he wrote a book in which he claimed Iran was on a relentless path to a nuclear bomb in 1995. He's asserted that Iran is a messianic, apocalyptic cult, and therefore negotiating with them would be pointless. The more prosaic reality is that Iran is run by a bunch of brutish mullahs and corrupt generals who have spent their energies amassing fortunes in this world not preparing for the next one. They've found it more advantageous to stay months away from a nuclear weapon rather than to cross that line. They want sanctions relief, not an end-of-days conflagration. There is a deal to be made with such men, not to become friends, but to serve a common interest of diffusing the dangers of nuclear arms races and bringing stability to a Middle East that has been scarred by generations of war and terror. Donald Trump is uniquely positioned to override Netanyahu's objections, cut through the usual Washington battle lines, and grab this opportunity.